Hi, welcome back to Create with Copper. Today I've got a gorgeous wirework pendant to show you. But if you're new to this channel or want to see more jewellery making techniques and tutorials, don't forget to hit that button and subscribe. Now let's make this beautiful wirework pendant top. I love this piece as an unfussy way to enhance a pendant. I've used this gorgeous amethyst shard, but you could adapt the technique for drops and pear-shaped beads. You could also include your favourite weaves. To make this, I'm using 0.9mm diameter copper wire, which is 19 gauge, but you could use a slightly higher or lower gauge to fit the size of your pendant. For the weaving wire, I'm using 0.4mm diameter, which is 26 gauge. Then I have a shard-shaped pendant, and just to give you an idea of scale, mine is 4cm long by 1.5cm at the top. And the tools needed are your wire cutters, round nose pliers, flat nose pliers and awl, and then optionally bail making pliers, a hammer and block, jeweller's torch and tweezers and a file. Now I expect to need around 20cm lengths of wire, but to give myself some leeway I'm using 25cm. So I've got one piece of wire that's 25cm long and one double length piece of wire at 50cm. And the first task is to decide what to do with the lower ends of the wire. Now you could create small loops on the end of the wire or hammer the wire flat, but I'm going to take the shortest piece and ball the end of that wire. So I'm just using my jeweller's torch and trying to keep the tip of that blue cone at the end of the wire until it balls up. And for more details on this technique, you can check out my balling head pins video. I've cleaned up the wire after heating, and using my pliers, I'm going to make a gentle curve in the end of that wire so the ball's facing downwards. And then with the other wire, I want to fold it in half. So I'm going to fold it gently to find the centre point. And then using my flat nose pliers, I'm going to make a sharp angle in the wire and gently close those two wires together. I'm then going to hold the end with my round nose pliers and bend that top wire into a fairly tight curve. I can then follow that with the second wire. And I can check how the wires are sitting together and adjust them as necessary. I'll then do a final check to see how they're going to sit on the gemstone. And I'm ready to start weaving. So I've got my 0.4mm weaving wire here, and I want to wrap it a few times around the frontmost of those two wire halves. In total, this pendant uses about 2.5 meters of wire, but it's best if you just use a length of wire that you're comfortable with and then add in as necessary. I've started that coil a little way up the wire, and then I want to push it as close to that point as possible. And then I'm going to start the weave by going over both of those wires twice. And then I'll take the weaving wire through between them. I'll then trim the tail of the weaving wire off and then add in that third wire with the ball on the end and wrap the weaving wire twice over that ball-ended wire and the next wire up and take the weaving wire through between them. I'm then going to continue this weave, wrapping the top two wires twice and the bottom two wires twice in the classic 2-2 weave. But as I get up to where the next row of wires will meet it, I'm just going to wrap those top two wires once. And I'll show you how I add in the second wrap later on. To settle these weaves, it's quite useful just to clamp them gently with the flat nose pliers. And I'll just continue this weave for a few centimetres that will be enough to get around to the back of the pendant. Now before I bend the wire around the pendant, I'm going to start my next two rows of wire work. The first is just going to be a single wire coiled with the weaving wire. And the second row will be a weave on 2 wires. So for that I'm going to add in a new piece of wire. I'm going to take 3 wraps on just the top wire. And then 3 wraps over both wires. And then back to 3 wraps on the top wire and 3 wraps on both wires. And this weave will continue in that 3-3 pattern. Part way along I can anchor these 2 weaves together. So part way through the wraps over 2 wires at the top, I can take that weaving wire down and over the bottom wire. Then bring it right the way round and back through, and then continue the weave on the top wire. And that will just fix those 3 wires together. I'll then continue both of the weaves. I only want to weave up to where I'm fixing this row to the previous row, which is where I'd left that single wrap. So I'm just going to position the weaving on the stone and gently wrap those wires around. And adjust the wire work so the 2 rows will be running parallel. And I'll just continue the weaving a little bit further. Now I've coiled that bottom wire up to the point where it meets the single wrap on the first weave that we did. And that's where I want to attach the 2 weaves together. So I'm just going to use my awl to make a space where that single wrap goes through the bottom 2 wires. And then that's where I'm going to take my coiling wire through. I'm going to carefully pull that wire through so it doesn't distort anything. And make sure it's sitting tightly at the back. I'll then take it up so it sits alongside the single wrap and creates the look of the double wrap. I'll then bring my weaving wire back up and I can continue coiling that single wire. And for each of these rows I'm going to anchor them into the previous row in the same way as I've done there, for probably 3 times around the pendant. Now I've finished weaving those 2 rows and carried on around the back of the pendant. And I'm just going to cut off the top weaving wire because I don't need that one anymore. And for the next rows round, I'm only going to use 2 wires because you don't always have to use the 3. I'm going to move that weaving wire up to the middle wire and I'm going to coil the middle wire this time. The bottom wire I'm going to keep bare, so I'll just coil that middle wire around to the point where I want to anchor it to the previous rows. Now I don't want the weaving wire to show on the bare wire, so I'm going to skip that and I'll show you how. I'll carefully use my awl to make a space where I want the weaving wire to come through in that previous row. And then I'll take that weaving wire under the bare wire and through that previous row. I'll then wrap it round and make sure it's sitting tightly within that previous weaving. And then take it back up underneath that bare wire. And I'll continue coiling that top wire as before. Now this will mean that bare wire isn't held anywhere as you weave around, but it will be tied into the rest of the weaving when you get to the next row. So it isn't something to worry about. Now I've finished those 2 rows and I'm going to weave a final row with 3 wires, so I'm picking up that wire that I left behind before. And for this weave I'm going to take the wire once over the top 2 wires. and then through between them, twice over the bottom 2 wires, and then through between them, back upwards once over the top 2 wires, and then I'm going to wrap just that top wire 5 times. I'll then wrap over the top 2 wires to begin the pattern again. So the pattern's once over the top 2 wires, twice over the bottom 2 wires, once over the top 2 wires, and 5 times over the top wire. Now as I get to the hole in the pendant, I could use that to take the weaving wire through, around the weave the other side, and then back again to anchor everything in place. I'd need to do that for a drop style pendant, but for this one, because of its shape, I don't need to, so I'm not going to worry about it. So I'll just continue that weave around and anchor it into the previous coil 2 or 3 times, using the same methods as I've shown you before. Now I'm going to finish this row just as I get round to the back by anchoring it into the previous row, and then we're ready to start weaving the bail. I'm going to start the bail with the 2-2 weave that we started with originally. So I'll just take that weaving wire over the top 2 wires twice, through between them, and then over the bottom 2 wires twice and through between them. And I'm just going to continue that for a little way. And then I want to mould those weaving wires around. For the loop itself, I'm going to leave the centre wire bare, which will be the top wire at the moment. So for the other 2 wires, I'm going to continue the weave, but just on those 2 wires. So I'll weave those 2 wires together twice, and then just the top wire twice. I then want to create a small loop with that bare wire. And I want to have it travelling forwards over the pendant. And I can use my bailing pliers to shape it and adjust it. I'm then going to follow that loop with the 2 woven wires. So they'll sit over the top and outside that loop. Once I'm happy with that loop, I can then weave the 3 wires together again with the 2-2 weave. Now I'm going to anchor this weave into the pendant at this point, but before I do that I want to decide how I'm going to finish these ends. So I think I'm going to hammer the ends flat and just have them sitting over the top of the pendant. I'll trim the ends just where I want them to finish. I just need to gently open out this wire work so I can make enough space to hammer the ends. And I just want to carefully hammer those ends. And if you've got a small hammer, it's just a little bit easier to make the space for access. Now those ends are a little bit sharp, so I'm just going to carefully file them. And then gently reposition the wire work. And then I can just move those ends into position. Now in order to anchor that wire work into the previous row, I'm going to make a space with my awl as before. But obviously access is a little bit more difficult now because the stone's in place. You just need to keep working at it. And I find if you make the end of the wire into a little hook shape, that makes it a little bit easier to get it through. And then I'm just going to continue that 2-2 weave as far as I can, and then finish the weaving wire by coiling it on that middle wire. I'll trim the excess off and then just adjust those base wires into their final positions. And the pendant's finished. I hope you enjoyed the video. If so, please press the like button below. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and head over to my website for more hints, tips and projects. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.